Hey, this is Notser, and today we're doing Untitled. We're going to be talking about PC hardware issues, Soviet battleship opinion, and then aircraft carrier critique, or status update. The game in the background is myself in the Tier 10 American aircraft carrier Midway. This is a recent game, I think it was 2 days ago. So this is as up-to-date as the aircraft carriers have been presented currently in the game. Hopefully you enjoy the game. But let's talk about Untitled topics. So PC hardware issues. Probably Tuesday, my hard drive failed that had all my thumbnails, my overlays, and my emoticons, my Twitch emoticons. All of that was, gone. And I was also using it as like sort of passive storage for some of my video files. Now, it wasn't important because those video files had already been used, but I lost this drive and I had to recover. So what I decided to do is I invested in an M.2 drive, a 1 terabyte M.2 drive, and this is going to be how I edit the video. Then I will render it into an upload file. That upload file will then be placed on YouTube for all of you to view. And with an M.2 file, it's a hell of a lot faster than the hard drives that I was using. I was using 2 4 terabyte hard drives, and now what I'm going to be doing is I'm using 1 terabyte M.2 SSD NVMe drive, and I will couple that with a hard drive for just basic storage, and that's a 4 to an 8 terabyte drive. All of this is on my gaming PC, and it seems to work the best. I know some of you guys don't know what I'm talking about, but basically every video format, resolution, and frames per second, all of that contributes to requiring a higher throughput. You need a certain gigabytes per second in order for the file to display correctly and encode correctly. So the faster the drive is, the easier I can handle 4K 60 video footage, 1440p, 144 hertz. You get the idea. It's important that you have that kind of throughput, and the only way you can get that is either through RAID 0 or super fast solid state drives. So that's what we've gone to. And it seems to work very well. I will say that M.2, they get surprisingly warm, and I think they all come with heat sinks now. So just pay attention to that. Either the heatsink is going to be on the motherboard, or it may be included in the M.2. But M.2s are just crazy. I got a terabyte drive that's as thin as, a piece of card or a credit card, something like that. And that's placed in my gaming rig. It all works. This video was made on it. Seems to be much improved performance. I have no complaints. Now, as far as the Soviet battleships are concerned, I understand that players are frustrated. I understand players are influenced. And I just wanted to be as upfront and honest with you as I possibly can be. I personally feel like the Soviet battleships are probably overpowered. I expect them to average probably a 55 to 58% win rate as a battleship. Now, why do I feel that way? It's real simple. They've got consistent accuracy that they can rely on. Obviously, the caveat to that is that they have to get somewhat close to the target. Somewhat close, like 15 kilometers, somewhat close. Oh yeah, that's the same range as most cruisers operate at. So that's fine. No issue there, right? This Des Moines, 15-ish or so, Worcester, all these things, you get the idea. My whole goal with any of these changes is in celebration for the gameplay. The gameplay itself is fun. For Soviet battleships, it is very fun. And it's not fun because it's overpowered. Okay, I get that whole... it's fun because the player has active choices that directly impact their ability to survive, damage the enemy, and provide utility for their team. Not every battleship line has that kind of feedback. I mean, look at the Germans. They have accuracy that you can't rely on. You can't possibly rely on their accuracy because it's so inconsistent. It's probably the biggest complaint for the Germans right now. But they do have hydroacoustic, which is a really useful tool. Surprisingly useful, honestly. And then their armor is great, but they lack that whole firepower part. The secondaries are mediocre right now in the current design of the game. We'll eventually have those buffed, but we don't have that right now. If you compare the Soviet battleships to something that has accuracy, Yamato, Musashi, those are great, powerful ships, but they lack the turret traverse to always have their armor perfectly safe from a 1 versus 1. Obviously, if there's crossfire, if there's anything else that's influencing the engagement, that will throw that out of the loop. But Soviet battleships are god tier 1 versus 1 battleships. They should dominate everyone in 1 versus 1. It's when there is multiple targets that they will probably take extra damage and excessive damage, depending on, the angling of the Soviet battleships and the skill of the target firing on them. I haven't had Soviet battleships fire on my own ship yet. I can only imagine how frustrating that can be in a ship that has a citadel so tall. The accuracy is just so consistent, and the gun caliber is pretty large. You got a 406 at tier 7, you got 356 at tier 6, you've got the 457s at tier 10, and these are really usable guns. I was thinking to myself, the Synop, it will be able to penetrate itself. So whenever you're fighting all of the Soviet battleships as they level up, and they will, I think the Soviet battleships will be very popular because they have such good, consistent feedback gameplay. Synops are going to love shooting other Synops with that 25mm bow and stern. And I've been noticing this. Tier 7, there are a hell of a lot of high-caliber Tier 7 ships. 406 to 410. You've got, of course, the Colorado, but you have the West Virginia that I think is at Tier 6, honestly, but again, 406. Then you've got the Synop. The Synop has 406s. They're really going to love each other in shooting. You've got the Nelson with 406s as well. It's not a coveted safe, 25mm at Tier 7 is almost nothing for a battleship. It might as well not even be there armor-wise. Now, obviously, just as all the other Soviet battleships, they have armor that they can use, and as long as they protect the weak points of the ship, they'll dominate, or they'll very nearly dominate. And that's because of their accuracy. And this is something that I would love to see come to every battleship, honestly. Something like that. Obviously not within the 12 to 15 kilometer, just godlike cruiser accuracy. But a battleship shouldn't be at 8 kilometers against another battleship, and for 80 or 90% of the shells to not even make contact with that ship. That feels really depressing. That feels like I don't have control of my destiny. And when I'm playing a game and I don't feel like I have control of my destiny, I usually turn it off. Life's too short to allow a random number generator to dictate your joy. And that's all I have really felt towards the Soviet battleships. This is a battleship line that I can reliably use. I can consistently rely on my skill, my knowledge of the game, and help my team, both in its tankability and its accuracy. That's exciting. Battleships don't usually have that feeling. They are honestly pretty selfish the way they're designed. And I don't blame them. The German accuracy is legendarily bad. The secondary systems are, mediocre. Secondaries in general are mediocre at best. Secondaries are only really for battleships. Yes, cruisers can have secondaries, and even a token DD Kiev. But secondaries are for battleships, and secondaries are awful. They don't reliably do damage. They do so inconsistent damage, and the range itself is really minimal that you can't rely on them. But you can rely on the Soviet battleship accuracy. And having your main guns feel accurate is something that I like. That feedback. Cruisers, DDs, they all have good accuracy. Stalingrad, Alaska. I don't really like the Kronstadt because the Kronstadt controls a lot like a battleship when it comes to its gun accuracy. But I absolutely love playing the other ones. And if the other battleships can get a little bit of an accuracy bonus at close range, I think that would help solidify the battleships' areas where they're good at. or areas where they're consistently good at. Obviously, Yamato has great long-range accuracy, and it should still be successful there. But when a battleship gets close, it shouldn't feel inept. It shouldn't feel like, oh, I got to unload 3 or 4 salvos on a DD because my accuracy is so egregious that at point-blank range, I can't even hit him. You know, that's not fun for the player base. So that's really all I'm channeling. The gameplay for the Soviet battleships is the most refined I've seen in any battleship line. It is on the same levels of joy and feedback and actively controlling as the DDs and the aircraft carriers and cruisers. And I think battleships deserve to have that kind of feeling. So, you know, that's all I'm saying. I know that they are powerful, and I know they will be powerful, and my hope is that Wargaming is more interested in bringing up the other battleships rather than feeling like, oh, all these mechanics that the Soviet battleships are good at, they feel great, but they're imbalanced. So therefore, we're just going to place the same design as all our other battleships. Well, that's great, but it doesn't do service to the game by denying the player base compelling gameplay. Like the submarine scenario in Halloween was awesome because it was different and it was fun. And honestly, the gameplay worked. Having that sort of staggered sequential torpedo reload and layering the torpedo flooding mechanic, and then obviously you've got either forward or back and the style either fast or slow. That was really compelling. That was really awesome. And I hope that every battleship feels that refined. And honestly, early tier doesn't feel very compelling. Accuracy, inconsistent. German battleship line, inconsistent accuracy. A bunch of other lines can have inconsistent accuracy at times and make you just facepalm. So I'm really just interested to see battleships as a whole benefit from the Soviet battleships introduction, because I think they deserve it. They've lost a lot of teeth, and I think in reintroducing some mechanic that rewards skillful play for the battleships, I don't think that's hurting anyone. And I think that's something compelling. That direct feedback of success is a really compelling reward. And I think it's there with the Soviet battleships. It's absolutely there with the Soviet battleships. And all the other battleships deserve to have some of that feeling of direct control success that is absolutely there for the Soviets and less so for the others. So that's all. That's all I want. I want the battleships to have fun and be able to benefit from these fun mechanics that have come online for the Soviets. Now, we've got the aircraft carrier discussion, and this is controversial because there are players that just don't like aircraft carriers, and that's fine. But for me, I'm looking at it from a gameplay standpoint. It offers variety for me. I am not someone who can play the same thing over and over and over again. I need variety in my life, and I need it in my video games. And the aircraft carriers offer that for me. Now they're not balanced. They're actually weak. Skillful players can still dominate, but it's really on the enemy team to make mistakes for that to occur, like to not have their AA just layered to the point where you can't possibly break through. That is absolutely an issue, and it still is an issue. So for an aircraft carrier to have any success, it's a combination of the enemy team having issues and not really sticking together and working as a team. And if the carrier exists to the end game, well, guess what? He can succeed because there's a lot of isolated targets. But the attack rockets are a shell of themselves. I mean, the lead in, the lead out. I've heard that a lot of American carriers will just refuse to use their attack rockets, and they will just use torpedoes and dive bombers because the high explosive dive bomb is better than the attack rockets. And that's the line that Wargaming, you've got to be very careful with, because if you nerf attack rockets too much, then the high explosive bombs replace it for the Americans, but armor piercing doesn't. Cluster bombs don't. Just straight up, the American aircraft carriers have a better design because they were privileged to have high explosive bombs be their primary dive bomb. It feels so arbitrary and unfortunate that it shouldn't exist like that. Attack rockets deserve to not be as powerful as they were, but they don't deserve to be so useless that people are literally ignoring the squadron itself in case they are using something more useful, the torpedo systems or the dive bombs. So that's a real concern, that the attack rockets just are not good enough. Obviously, we want the cluster bombs to be better, and with the most recent hotfix, Wargaming added a little bit more cluster bomb drop pattern, and they narrowed it up for the Furious, so hopefully it feels a little bit better. But it's still not as good as it used to be. Now, does it need to be? I don't know. Maybe it does, with the attack squadrons being so weak. I mean, for the Brits, it's basically average, very average, below average attack squadron. You've got the short-range torpedoes, which I love for the Brits, but only a couple torpedoes, obviously. And then the cluster bomb, which is useless against DDs, narrow cruisers. And honestly, for a long time, it was useless against every target because it just didn't have that consistent clustering mechanic that you could rely on. It was just unfortunate. So obviously, a lot of issues that need to be addressed. I personally feel like if we address the group up AoE, we obviously fix the UI to be a little bit more of obvious information, and we make sure that the 3 squadrons have legitimate uses that can't be replaced by the other squadrons. It feels like good, compelling gameplay. And, players have really developed a great way of recognizing. I've noticed that players will use the fighter consumable. They will spam it whenever they feel like I'm on an attack run with their aircraft, and it scrambles so quickly. The only way that you can attack that player is to try and pull their fighter over your fighter aura. And that's totally possible, and I've started this technique where I place my fighter a little bit outside the enemy fighter, and what I'll do is I will get close enough that the fighter wants to follow me, and I will drag it over so that my teammate and the fighter consumable can kill it mine own. But, the fighters, there's not a lot of room for mistakes, and as the player base learns this, it'll be a little bit easier. I was talking to Gaishu, and he was telling me that speed is the way that you avoid taking damage, not reinforcing the armor or the hit points. So he uses a combination of hit points and speed for his commander build and for his modules, and he doesn't really sacrifice on either, and I'm sure that many aircraft carriers do this. I just want to relay this. I found a lot more success when I went for speed. I was able to get in and get out and avoid those continuous ticks that were just so devastating to my healthy build, but less so to the speed build. So I'm feeling better about the carriers. They're not quite there yet, but the gameplay is definitely more balanced than it was. And I think that's good. I think the existence of carriers is a healthy one for the game because it offers your teammates a reliable source to contribute in a 1 versus 2 or a 2 versus 2. I've played many games where the carrier itself has created scenarios that have never occurred in World of Warships before, and I love that. I feel like that is exactly what we're looking for, this unique variety that every class can bring. That's what I love about World of Warships. So, tell me what you think of all the comments I made, PC hardware, the Soviet battleships, and the aircraft carriers. Please don't. I'm just trying to share my thoughts. And I just want gameplay that is fun and brings players over because it is so spectacular. And I think that Wargaming is doing a good job of moving that direction with ships. Hope you enjoy this, and yeah, top on the team, heartbreak for sure. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.